Hey everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we'll be discussing about the OpsWorks lifecycle events. Now, this specific topic is quite important for the exams, and in fact, most of the things that we discuss are important for the exams. The rest are important for your knowledge that will help you in day-to-day activities. So let's get started and understand the lifecycle events in OpsWorks. Now, generally, OpsWorks has 5 events that occur during its entire life cycle, and these events are setup, configure, deploy, undeploy, and shutdown. Now, with each of the events which are part of the OpsWorks lifecycle, we can associate a specific chef cookbook recipe with each of them. So before we go ahead and begin and understand what each of these means, let me quickly show you where can you actually see all of these events. So currently I am in my OpsWorks console and we had deployed a Node.js app server. Now within here, if you click on recipes, and this is the recipe where you are putting the repository URL, and here you will see you can actually see the lifecycle event where you have setup, configure, deploy, undeploy, and shutdown. Now within each of this you can actually specify the recipe that you want to execute. Like during the deploy you have a node.js_demo. During the setup phase you might have something like bootstrapping. Similar to this, you can specify individual recipe during each of these events. So before you go ahead and specify the recipes, you should understand what each of these events actually is and what are its functionalities. So let's go ahead and understand more about these. So the first event of the lifecycle of OpsWorks is the setup event. So setup event generally happens when the instance completes the initial booting up process. So whenever you launch an instance, the state of the instance is booting up. Now as soon as that booting up state completes, then comes the transition where the initialization packages are installed. So let's assume that you have an application which is based on PHP. So during the setup page, what you can do is you can install the PHP and Apache through the layer recipes so that your application, when you deploy, it works perfectly because the backend PHP layer is already installed. So this is the setup phase. The next phase is the configure phase. Now configure is very important to understand because basically during the configuration phase, event occurs on all the stack instances. So let's take an example. Before we go ahead and understand these three things, let's take an example where you have a reverse proxy server. Now this reverse proxy server can be a Nginx, it can be a HA proxy or any custom reverse proxy solution. So you have a reverse proxy over here and you have the EC2 instance. Now generally for the reverse proxy to send traffic to the backend server, the IP address or the hostname of this server has to be registered within the reverse proxy. This is very important aspect. Now during the transition, like during OpsWorks, there can be a case where there can be a new instance that gets added. So let's assume that this is the new EC2 instance which is added. Now, since in this reverse proxy, we specify the hostname of the EC2 instance for which it will be sending traffic to. Since this is a new instance, by default, reverse proxy will not know, or the configuration file of the reverse proxy will not have the hostname or the IP address of this EC2 instances. So let's take an example. So the first stage is the setup stage. The second stage that we have discussed is the configure stage. Now, as soon as this EC2 instance gets initialized, the first thing that happens is the setup stage. So this is where the setup stage occurs and where all the base packages and everything gets installed here. Now, the next stage that occurs over here is the configure page. Now, along with this, once the configure stage occurs in this EC2 instance, what OpsWorks will do is the thing that you have mentioned within the configure stage, it gets executed in all the instances within the stack. So as soon as this EC2 instance gets set up And now the configure stage gets initialized in all the EC2 instances. So it gets initialized over here. So whatever recipe that you mentioned during the configure page, it gets executed in the reverse proxy. It also gets executed in the EC2 instance. So you might have something like during the configure stage, the reverse proxy will get the hostname associated with this new EC2 instance, and it will update its own configuration file. So once the configure, whatever recipe that you have put in the configuration stage, the reverse proxy will get updated, the EC2 instance will get updated, and now the reverse proxy will go ahead and send the traffic to the EC2 instance which is newly launched. So this is what the configure stage is all about. Now do remember that during the configuration stage, this event, whatever recipe that you mention within the configure, will get executed across all the instances within the stack. Now events in the configure stage are executed when the instance enters or leaves the online state. This is the first aspect. Second aspect is when you associate or deassociate an elastic IP of the instance. And the third stage is when you attach or detach a ELB from the layer. So this is where the configure stage pumps in. So this is the second stage of the OpsWorks lifecycle. Now the third and the fourth stage are pretty straightforward. The third stage is the deploy stage, where whatever application that you have, it gets deployed within the instance which gets created. And the fourth stage is the undeploy stage, which is also very straightforward, where whatever applications that is deployed, you can go ahead and you can undeploy it from the instance. Now let me quickly show you both of these things. Now within the deployments, when you do a deploy app, there are two commands. One is deploy and second is undeploy. So if you want to deploy, you can deploy. Let's assume that tomorrow I have a new update which I want to deploy. So you can go ahead and deploy. And if you want to undeploy, you can do that as well. So currently within the EC2 instance that we have, we had the Node.js which got deployed. So if I go into the apps, you have the Node.js sample app which had got deployed within the EC2 instance. Now we'll be discussing more about these in the upcoming lecture, but I hope you understood what the deploy and undeploy is all about. And the last stage of the lifecycle event of OpsWorks is the shutdown state. Now the events in this stage, whatever cookbook recipe that you write within this stage, are basically executed when we inform OpsWorks to shut the instance down before EC2 instance are terminated. Very important to understand. So before the EC2 instance is terminated, when the EC2 instance is shutting down, you might want to do various things. So if your EC2 instance is registered with, let's assume, anti-malware software, you might want to deregister that instance with that central server. So all of those things you can do with the help of the shutdown stage. Now the default shutdown timeout is 120 seconds, which you can modify during the lifecycle. So this is the high level overview about the OpsWorks lifecycle events. Make sure you have a high level understanding about the lifecycle events and what are the things which are associated with each lifecycle event. I hope this video has been informative for you, and in the next video we'll be discussing about the create deployment command in OpsWorks.